Welcome to Beyond Boom and Bust, a strategy for Wyoming's future, a Tax Facts Lunch and Learn webinar hosted by Wyoming Tax Facts and Equality State Policy Center. I am Jenny DeSaro, the Executive Director of the Equality State Policy Center. ESPC is an independent voice in Wyoming advocating for fair elections and transparent government in support of all Wyoming communities. Before we start logistics, please use the Q&A function to ask questions as they arise, and then we'll pitch some along the way and be sure to save some time at the end to really dive into those questions. And with that, I pass it along to Sue Summers.
Thanks, Jenny, Equality State Policy Center, and the Wyoming Community Foundation for making these webinars possible. And thanks to everyone attending today. This is our final webinar of 2025. I'm Sue Summers, co-founder of Wyoming Tax Facts. We are Wyomingites committed to a stable economic future for our state by increasing tax literacy in our communities. Learn more about us at wyomingtaxfacts.org. Our presenter today is Josh Dorrell. He's CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. The Business Council's mission is to support local leaders, businesses, and communities in building strong, sustainable economies through innovative programs, resources, and partnerships. They do this by identifying problems and breaking down the barriers that obstruct a more resilient economy. Today, we'll look at those barriers, including Wyoming's tax structure. Welcome, Josh, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you, Jenny, for having me today, and thank you all for joining. I'm looking forward to walking through a few things that I think will shock a few of you and maybe get some head nods on some others, and definitely some quizzical looks and questions, hopefully, to cover. I know that there is a lot to unpack when it comes to our economy. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen so that we've got that up. I've got a few elements that we might want to walk through. But I want to start today with kind of who I am and where I'm from. My name is Josh Dorrell, and I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, and that is a position I've been lucky enough to hold since February of 2020. But before that, if you rewind the clock a few, well, about 45 years or so, to 1975, is when my family came to Wyoming. When I was just a baby, we were looking for economic growth and opportunity. My dad had just got back from Vietnam, and he and my mom had my older sister and I, and realized that they wanted to kind of get away from their maybe a pretty bleak economic state in north central Missouri, a small farming community where there was probably more poverty than they wanted to deal with, and moved to Wyoming because they saw a future in Wyoming that would be bright and would be able to provide for their young family, who later added a couple more kids along the way. And we moved to Rawlins, Wyoming in 1975. And my dad worked in the coal mines of Hannah, and he was able to work there for a number of years. We went through the booms and busts. He spent a little bit of time not working at the coal mines and working construction until the coal mines got going again in Hannah. And then he was somebody who was lucky in a lot of ways enough to retire from the coal mines in Hannah when they shut down. And it's pretty interesting to think about that all that happened within my time on in Rawlins, and then in Laramie after graduating from high school and going to college there. All of those things happened in a pretty short amount of time, really. But it's a really interesting microcosm because when I graduated high school, I assumed that based on that kind of boom and bust cycle and seeing how it played out for our family, that I was probably going to have to leave after getting an engineering degree, and I was probably going to have to move to another state to have my career ambitions met. Now, I didn't like that. I didn't want that. I was lucky enough, though, to find a company in Laramie, Wyoming, after I graduated from engineering school, that would hire me on, and I got to work in the tech sector for a number of years, and so I felt very, very fortunate to be able to raise my own family in Wyoming and be in a place where I could achieve the things in my career that I didn't think possible before. And that didn't come without sacrifice, though. It didn't come without those choices that you have to make. And my company was purchased in 2012 by a large global company, and I spent 3 years with them. But to move up in that company, they were going to ask me to leave Wyoming, and that was a non-starter for me. So I left that company and went to work for another Wyoming company called Tri-Hydro, where I spent a number of years learning a little bit more about the state and learning a little bit more about myself. And then when this job at the Wyoming Business Council came available, I got to realize a dream, which was to lead an organization and to stay in Wyoming. And I realized that that's not the case for everyone. And I'm going to show you some data that kind of proves that out. But it's, I've had a really remarkable career in Wyoming, and I feel very, very fortunate for it. And I think in a lot of ways that drives me every day to try to create that for others. And when I think about the Wyoming Business Council and our role in the state, a lot of people sort of think, well, you're here to help businesses and to fund businesses. And it's true that we're here to help businesses, but we're here to create an environment and an economy where businesses can thrive and people can live out their ambitions and continue to grow within their careers and enjoy the beauty and the what I think is the just the greatest place on earth of Wyoming. And so to do that, that's a hard thing because not everybody gets to do it. But that's what brings my team to work every day, and that's what brings me to work every day. And to do that, I really feel it's important for us to really kind of look hard in the mirror and talk about the things that maybe aren't that great, and to maybe make sure that we're digging in and being Wyomingites and really solving this problem. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna step through a few myths today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's really going on in our economy and maybe how that might be different from what we see or what we believe we've been told over the course of our lives about Wyoming. And hopefully by breaking down some of those myths, we'll be able to really open the doors to our economy and get it moving in a direction that maybe it's never moved. And so today is all about that idea of separating myth from reality and making sure that we're thinking about how do we really kind of create this idea of boom to bust and bust to boom and all of that, and how do we create an economy for the future that we can all be really, really proud of. I'm gonna tackle the first one. The first myth that I'm going to tackle is that Wyoming's economy is doing just fine. Now, I will tell you, when I roll out this myth and the reality behind it, I rolled it out a few times, and in a few conversations, people have said, "Well, that's not right at all, and I think you're wrong, and Wyoming is just fine, and don't mess with my Wyoming," essentially. And as we talk more about it, and as I show graphs like our GDP is relatively flat, and that if you were to take a look at it versus our peers, we're in the orange there, and our neighboring states are in the blue. We're not doing as well as we could be. And to me, being last amongst our neighboring states is not acceptable. But people say, well, gosh, that's just not true. I feel like things are going pretty well for me. And I say that's probably true. There are a lot of folks in this state that are doing just fine, and that's great. But what we're looking at is how do we grow the economy so that more and more people have opportunities? And when your GDP is flat, that's hard to do. That indicates something that we need to work on. The next thing I'd like to share is that the job opportunities in Wyoming and the wages that we can get in Wyoming are just not there. The job opportunities, again, versus our neighboring states are not there. Our employment is flat, and the number of job opportunities doesn't seem to be increasing that dramatically, while it does in our neighboring states. And we also take a look at the wages that our workforce gets, and that is shrinking. And now folks will say to me, well, Josh, that's because we've had such good wages because of all of the mining activity and the fact that our folks can have really good jobs, that it was bound to shrink. And while that's possible, and that may be true in some cases, to me, as someone who looks at how do we create an environment in which our people can thrive and our businesses can too, I look at these things and say, this isn't good. These are not good indicators. And these are trends that we should pay attention to. We shouldn't try to justify them. And again, that doesn't always make me that popular, but at the end of the day, my goal is to create a place where Wyoming has the people of Wyoming have opportunities, and that our economy can survive and thrive with the businesses in it and attract more. And so we take a look at those three things and we say, gosh, well, that's not great, but here's something I really want everybody to take a look at. And these are two graphs that really describe our population. And there are two key things that I want you to look at. And on the left side is our population. And on the top line, that blue line of that graph, there is our population growth. Now, in some ways, people will say, well, that's good news. Our population is growing. And that's good. That can be a good thing. And the challenge, though, is that our workforce numbers are not growing. And so the gap between the people in the state and the folks that are available to work and that are willing to work is widening. And that is a challenge for us. Again, that does not indicate a thriving and vibrant economy. It indicates a place where maybe the bulk of the population is out of the workforce. And for us, that's a key indicator that things are challenging. And on the right side of that slide is maybe the most impactful personally and the biggest challenge that we face. This particular graph on the right demonstrates what we call outmigration. Some people might call it brain drain. I look at it a little bit more close to home, and I think about my family and I think about my 4 children, and will they have opportunities in the state, or will they have to leave to chase their careers and to get the best out of their life? And that's a challenge, because right now we are the best in the United States at exporting our talent. And you might say, well, gosh, we're the best. Well, if you think about it, we're also the state that loses more of its youth and early stage career folks. In fact, we are double the national average at outmigration. And again, people will say, well, look, people want to leave home, they want to go explore the world. We're all for that. And it's not that we can't allow that. We should allow that. But the challenge is that we're twice the national average at doing that. We're the absolute worst in the United States at it. And if people are leaving Wyoming, it also means that people are probably not going to come to Wyoming. And again, for a vibrant economy, you need those things. And so you might ask, well, where are they all going? And why is this happening? Well, this phenomenon, and this is in particular, this graph takes a look at where are all of these people that are leaving Wyoming going. And so I'll just go ahead and zoom in really quickly here, and you can see that the folks that leave Wyoming, chances are pretty good they're going to go to a neighboring state so that they can stay close enough, but at the same time have those economic opportunities. And they go to places like Denver, Fort Collins, Salt Lake City, and Billings, amongst others. And this is a really important phenomenon I want everyone to think about. In America, but especially in Wyoming, we're a very acute and an extreme case. Rural communities are essentially in a vicious cycle that is going toward the bottom. And what I mean is that in small communities, businesses have a hard time growing because there aren't enough people for them to hire. And therefore, as those businesses grow or shrink or leave, there are less and less opportunities. Well, if there are less opportunities, people will leave. And so you get this spiral of people leaving, businesses shrinking or leaving, then more people leave and businesses leave again, and you get a vicious cycle. While in communities like Denver, Fort Collins, Billings, Salt Lake City, you have the opposite. You have a virtuous cycle where more people come to those cities, therefore those businesses can hire workforce and grow, or come to those cities and enjoy that larger workforce. Therefore, more people go to those cities, and the cycle is a virtuous one. So they're growing, and that system is creating more growth, while in many cases, we're shrinking. And that's a challenge for us to face. And again, when I show all of these things, people say, well, gosh, that either looks bleak, or they try to justify it, or they say, well, good, we don't want any of those people anyway. And we think, gosh, what is, as somebody whose job is to develop and create a vibrant economy, we look at how do we change that? And so I say all of those things to just help everyone realize that while individually we may be doing okay, as we look at the macro trends and as we look at what's going on in the economy around us, we're not necessarily taking advantage of all of the opportunity that we can. The next myth I want to take on is this one. And we actually hear this quite a bit, where there's just not enough money to go around to pay for the things that we want. And this is always a topic, especially during budgeting season with the state legislature when it comes to looking for a budget. The state doesn't have enough money in its general fund to do the things that we want to do. And that may be the case, but we're definitely not broke. The state has significant savings, and I'm going to show you one example of those savings. This is what we call our rainy day fund. And in this bar chart, at the very top of that bar chart is Wyoming. So if you needed an excuse to pat yourself on the back about how great Wyoming is, we are number one in the number of days that the state government can survive without any revenue. In fact, we have almost a year of rainy day funds. So we can operate without revenue for a year. Now, again, we're pretty proud of this. We continue to pack money away into that rainy day fund. But I want to challenge that a little bit. I want people to think about it a little bit differently. The first thing I want everyone to think about is it really that important for us to have double the next highest rainy day fund in the US, which is Alaska, by the way? Do we really need to have 302 days to operate our state government without any revenue? Do we really need that? And my answer is no. One, I don't think it's a good incentive to have all of this cushion. I don't think it's putting our money to work. I think it's akin to stuffing it in a mattress and saying, we don't know what to do with it, so we're going to put it away for a rainy day. And I think if you look at the slides I showed before, if you don't see a rainy day, well, boy, you're just as optimistic as can be, I guess. But you're also not very realistic, because the challenges that we face in our economy are dramatic. And I think that those numbers prove that out. So the question is, why are we sitting on this giant rainy day fund when we could have nearly $800 million to invest in the future of the state? And I don't necessarily want to say that it was a bad idea to create this. It was a great idea to create this. We want that certainty. We want to be able to provide that level of security. But do we really need this much security? And is that incentivizing good behavior from our leaders of the state to say, we're here to really promote the future and to build the future? Should we keep this kind of money in a rainy day fund, or in our mattress, if you will?
Josh, can I challenge you just a bit on this? Can you define, when you say rainy day funds, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the reserve investment accounts, or expendable funds from all of those, or just the LSRA, for instance, which is what everybody calls the rainy day fund?
Yes. So great question, Sue. And so this is actually just the LSRA. So this is that reserve account that we call, affectionately the rainy day fund, which everyone, every so often people talk about when it's raining and when it's not. But ultimately the LSRA is the rainy day fund. This particular fund has more than this now. It has at the time of this data, it was $1.5 billion in that fund. And again, it's about twice as long as Alaska. The state in other funds has I believe it's over $30 billion that is being utilized to help our general fund and to help our kicking off interest that we then utilize and invest. But in this particular case, I'm just talking about the LSRA.
And you're talking about the holdings in that, are those investments, or is that just cash sitting there?
I would guess that it's investments. I don't understand the portfolio makeup. That's something that I'd be happy to work with folks on to understand it. But it is managed according to statute, I'm sure.
It's really complicated. We've had people on here before to tell us about it, and it's hard to absorb. So no, your point taken. And at some point, I want you to, hopefully your presentation includes some of the things you would do with that money.
Well, that's a great foreshadowing, Sue. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, I think there's a challenge that we face, but there's an opportunity that we have with our savings to do something about that and to really chart the course of our future. There are a couple myths I'm going to tackle right now that are pretty shocking, actually. This is something that I hear a lot. People will say to us, well, you know what, those folks ought to just leave, and heck, we don't want any more people in Wyoming. We don't want our economy to grow. And so, you know, instead of just saying, well, we want it to grow, or golly, is that right? Or yeah, gosh, we just don't want it to grow. We decided we're gonna run an experiment, and we're going to take a look at the data, and we're going to do some polling. And what we're going to do is we're going to find out, do people want growth in Wyoming? And what I can tell you is that you would be surprised probably by the results. So we're going to be releasing more information about this poll that was done over the last few months. And what we learned is that 73% of the people who are polled support a future where there are people and businesses moving in, bringing in new jobs, services, and opportunities, and they even support it along with the challenges that growth bring, like increased traffic, housing development, and changes in community dynamics. So I think one of the things that's really pretty interesting is that people want growth. They actually say 8 out of 10 people favor their local community taking a strong position on growth and being pro-growth. And I think it's important for us to really step back and say, well, okay, so if those are the numbers, and again, I'm going to be happy to push the full report out and get everybody, you know, kind of fully immersed in the data as we are. We love that. But I want everybody to sit back and think, okay, well, if 3 out of 4 people want growth, and 8 out of 10 people believe that we should take a strong stance at a local level around growth, why do we have this myth that says we don't want growth? And is it just our fear of that myth that is stopping that growth? And I don't pretend to be Winston Churchill, but I think he's got a pretty famous quote about fear. And I think we ought to think about that really hard, because it's just not necessarily true that Wyomingites don't want growth. We definitely have some exceptions to that, but by and large, we want growth in Wyoming. Okay, this is where it's going to get pretty interesting. Okay, nobody wants taxes to increase. And I underline the word nobody because the myth is that nobody would want taxes to increase. And Sue, you and I could probably talk about this all day long from different perspectives, maybe from different angles. But this is something that we look at because the thing that we're trying to figure out is we've got these ideas for the future that are going to require investment, but where are we going to pay for them? How can we do that with our current fiscal structure? Can we? And if we can't, how are we going to change that so that we can pay for the things that are going to secure our future and create opportunities for Wyomingites if indeed nobody wants taxes to increase? Well, if you've seen the pattern so far, well, this is a myth and I'm about to bust it, okay? You're going to be surprised again here. So here's something that's pretty interesting. Now, people that are, you know, don't want taxes to change are like, well, Josh, the oppose column is much higher than the support. But to us, we really did think nobody would want taxes to increase. And so we conducted that poll of Wyoming voters. These are Wyoming voters, mind you. These aren't just regular people on the street. These are Wyoming voters. And we thought we would hear a resounding no. We thought that people would not want to pay taxes to bring jobs and support economic opportunities. But what we found is that 35% of people are in favor of them. Okay, so before we thought nobody would do that, but it's actually 35% are supportive of it. And here's what's pretty interesting about this. When you look down into the data, the people who believe that Wyoming's economy is in decline, and that's just the people who believe it, half of them support paying taxes in order to change that economic decline. And so as we look at this, I think we just need to realize that tax is a tool. It is not a bad word. That tax is something that is a way that we can invest in ourselves and invest in the future, because we're going to have to pay for it. And I think we've got to really just kind of reframe our mind around it. And I hope that what this does is it helps people understand that the more people are educated about the state of the state, as well as this being a tool that could help our future, I think that gap starts to shrink even more. And so I'm not sure if we want to take a complete departure here, but I do want to cover something else that I think is important about taxes. And that is, as the state's economic development agency, we see a lot of companies that want to move into the state. We see a lot of people every day that want to start their businesses here or bring their businesses here. And in the almost 6 years that I've had this role, people don't come to us and say, Josh, we want to come to a place that has zero taxes. In fact, what they say is, your fiscal structure, your tax structure actually scares us because we don't believe that it's sustainable. We don't believe that you can support the types of businesses we have with your fiscal system. And so I just want you to chew on those two things. That one, individuals who are Wyoming voters, more of them support paying their own way and being self-sufficient than you might believe. And two, rarely or never has a business come to us and said, the best thing about your state is the no taxes and we don't want to pay a dime to be here. In fact, they want the opposite. They want to play the game. They want to work with us, and they want to be in a place that's sustainable. Here's another myth that I think we hear a lot, and that is we shouldn't do anything that will create more problems. I don't have to spend a lot of time on that. That's the seeking of a perfect solution. And what I can tell you is that just doesn't exist. The more complex a problem, and our economy is a complex problem by definition, the more complex a problem, the more that your solution will only solve a piece of it, and that other things will change because of it. Every choice has consequences. Every solution creates other problems. We sort of have to wrap our mind around that. And one of the things that we've found at the Business Council is we've developed this methodology called the economic growth flywheel. And the idea is that we are going to continue to cycle through problems, and we're going to continue to work on solving problems, realizing that one, will never be done because it's a complex problem. And two, that it will have consequences, some of them unintended that we'll have to solve, some of them better than we expected, and we're going to get a win from that. But we're going to have to just get better at building that problem-solving muscle rather than feeling everything that we do has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, we shouldn't do it because it just isn't reality. Now, this is one of my favorites, is that nobody knows what to do. And I don't think that this one was a myth that I wasn't that sure of. And I'll tell you why. I wasn't sure about this myth because, frankly, that's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of things where we're dabbling here, we're dabbling here. But most of anytime we have extra revenue, we pack it away. Anytime we have, we've got sunny days, we don't necessarily invest in the future and make a big bet. We sort of hold tight. And so that says to me that nobody knows what to do. But as we've worked through this cycle, as we've understood the problem better because of this economic growth flywheel, we started to realize that we actually do know what to do. We know that we are in a vicious cycle. where we have a low population, therefore firms leave, therefore people leave, therefore firms leave, and we're in that vicious cycle. We know that we need an injection of a lot of knowledge workers into this state. We also know that we have a lot of opportunity in terms of the money that we have as a state and the savings that we have that we can do something with. That $778.1 billion that I showed a few slides ago, to me, that's an opportunity for us to invest in the future. We can still beat Alaska by one day and have $778 million to do work with. And so the question I have is, well, what should that be? How can we inject a whole lot of jobs to try to reverse that brain drain and utilize the resources that we have? And one of the things that we're looking at is this idea around a critical minerals laboratory that will allow us to know more about these things that we pull out of the ground today and that we're finding are even more important on a national and global scale. And we have them in Wyoming. And we know that not only getting them out of the ground and processing them is important, but also we know that the applications around them is important. And so what we're looking at is, how do we develop a national lab level, not necessarily a national lab, but an institution that's like a national lab focused on a Wyoming problem, which is we have this challenge that our people are leaving and that we're shipping out our critical minerals. We're going to be shipping more out. How do we take all of those things and keep them in the state? How do we invest in ourselves and own our future and put thousands of people to work around critical minerals that might be for electronics, aerospace, computer science applications, so that we own the whole value chain and that we understand that whole value chain, that will then catalyze more businesses around this national lab, that will create a clustering effect of those really big brains that we know that we're losing today, to really start to change the face of the economy in Wyoming, so that we have a number of opportunities that we've never seen before, all around things that we know how to do really, really well, which is mine and get things out of the ground and maybe even process them and put them to use in ways that we haven't thought of. And I think there's a whole lot of national attention that we can get, but I think that is not what's important. What's important is that we can do this ourselves. We can send a strong signal to the world that says we're serious about Wyoming. We're so serious that we're not saying we have to take somebody else's money or federal money to do that. Rather, we can own our own future. We can own our own destiny and create this really big and powerful institution that might just change that economic outlook that we have and be thousands of opportunities for Wyomingites from now and into the future. The other thing we know is that slicing up the same little pie over and over again and trying to find out where, like, if my agency wants a little bit more money, well, I've got to take it from some other agency. And what we know right now is it's not just about the revenue that we are or are not getting. It's about the incentive that the system is creating. And right now, the incentive is for us to just slice up that same size pie in different ways. So that means my agency has to look at it and try to take it from another agency, or some other agency has to try to take it from me, and the pie never gets bigger. But why can't we make a bigger pie? Why can't we look at a way to generate more revenue so that we can do those investments for the future and set up a system where that success begets success? So we've already taken a look at how the economy is probably in decline. Not probably, it is in decline. We've also taken a look that we've packed a lot of money away in savings and we can make some good investments. We also know that people's attitude toward growth is maybe not the same as we thought, that we really want growth, but we're just not sure what to do. And now we're saying we actually do know what to do. We know that we need to invest in institutions that will agglomerate those knowledge workers and catalyze business in Wyoming. We also think that there should be changes in our fiscal system so that as more and more people come to our communities, as more businesses come, that we can actually generate the revenue that will allow our communities to grow. Because today, our communities have to spread things really, really thin. And if a new housing development comes in, for example, they typically have essentially the same amount of revenue, and they've got to extend their infrastructure. They've got to take care of more people. They've got to do those things without more revenue to do it. And our suggestion is to take a look at the fiscal system in a way that aligns population growth and revenue growth. Now, another thing that I think is something that we just sort of like punt this down the road because we think, gosh, we've got time to fix this. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And we've got time. It's not urgent. So we're not really in a rainy day. Well, let me help everyone understand that based on the data that we've seen, it's raining. And the other thing, and I'll tell you this much, and it pains me to say it, but this isn't going to be an immediate change. This is going to take time to do it. And it's only going to get worse if we don't address it. So it is much more urgent than we've ever understood. This isn't about some tweaks to a program. This isn't about making things just work just a little bit better. No, this is about making a big bet on the future. And this is about us taking a stand that says, look, if we don't make this investment today, we're going to be in trouble in 5, 10, 20 years down the road. But if we do make this investment today, then it's a faster path to those opportunities that we need so dearly. So I think that's really important for us to understand, is that this is pretty darn urgent. My final myth is that nobody's willing to lead. I've heard this a few times, and I don't believe it. I believe there are people willing to lead, but I've heard people say, well, gosh, we just need somebody to stand up and say, this is what we should be doing. We just need somebody with a fancy title to say we should go this direction, or this is what we're going to do. And I think it's a myth, because I actually believe that we are the folks that are listening to this particular webinar, the people at the Business Council, the local leaders that I've talked with, the folks in the legislature. There are a number of people who are basically saying we've got to take Wyoming's future in our own hands. We've got to stop being thrown around by the markets that are out there, the external forces, the federal government, and we've got to take this on our own, and we've got to lead ourselves to that prosperity and that thriving economy. We should no longer wait for the external factors to create a boom or create a bust that defines our future. And so what I would say to you today is that we would love to hear from you. We would love to help be part of this team of thousands that we're trying to create, of people who are saying, we want to grow. We want Wyoming to have a thriving economy. We want opportunities for us and our children into the future. And it's not just about today, and it's not just about saving money. It's about investing in our future. And so if you wouldn't mind snapping that QR code, taking a few minutes out of your day to tell us what you think, we would sure appreciate it. And with that, Sue and Jenny, I'm all for answering any questions the audience might have or you might have. Thank you.
Great presentation, Josh. Okay, maybe do you want to stop sharing your screen, and then we'll then we'll have really big faces. Yes, and I have to point out we did have Governor Friedenthal on here to talk about his book Paradox of Plenty, and one of the main tenets of the book was that we have had 50 years of, well, more now, of letting other people pay our taxes for us. That is the minerals industry and these boom bust industries, and that is one underpinning of our lives as Wyomingites, that we've depended on that, and so much so that now we feel it's our just due, and that is that can never change. And so thank you for giving us a reality check, Josh. We do have some Q&A here. We have a question about the outmigration average being double the national average. And they're asking whether the Business Council has a role in training and meeting with new legislators and educating them on Wyoming's economy. And I know you can speak to that because I've seen your presentations to committees, but perhaps something broader is needed.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you know, what I would say is that whenever we get a chance, we talk with legislators, obviously in committee meetings and those kinds of things for sure. And whenever we have programs like broadband and that we do our best to put on webinars to inform everyone. But I think there's a real opportunity right now. There's probably been a lot of, this is probably another myth, that there's not a very good relationship between the legislature and the executive branch. And I just, what I've found is that legislators are working to solve problems. And when we meet with them one-on-one or in groups, they're willing to listen, they're willing to understand. I do think that there's a responsibility that we have as an executive branch agency to inform and educate and make policy suggestions based on the problem that we see. And I think that's a hard thing because legislators have a lot thrown at them. But we do educate as much as we can, and we do make policy suggestions and investment suggestions, not just through our budget, but in other situations, because we see the problem probably better than anyone else. And my goal is to build those relationships really, really strong so that we can continue to have policy evolve to solve the problem that we see.
Do you feel this is just popped into my head? So how would you spend the money? Kind of circling back to my
Yep.
previous question about the LISRA and
Yeah.
the opportunities you see for assuming that we are going to start broadening our tax base at some point. How would you start supporting the growth of the economy?
Yeah. Well, I think our first best bet, and it's a timely one, is on the idea of a lab, and we think that it's at a minimum going to cost about $500 million of an investment to get that going and to keep that going for a number of years. I think ultimately it would be supported by the state. It would be supported by a national investment. I feel like that might happen, and I think it could also be supported by corporate those companies that are looking to develop those applications and looking to do those experiments with the critical minerals. So I think there's a good path for that. But I think that right there, that $500 million investment is really important. The other area that I would utilize, and this is going to take two things. It's actually going to take an investment, but it's also going to take a policy change. I think there's an investment in infrastructure, critical infrastructure within our communities, because just 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks now, we had a project come before our board of directors, and it just was approved by SLIB for a wastewater treatment plant in Kimmer, Wyoming. And that's critical infrastructure for their community to be livable, not even for the growth that it's going to experience, just for today. And so I think we're going to have to really invest in the infrastructure. And I think this is the component that I do believe is really important. I don't think the state should be the only person or the only entity funding those things. The state has a role. The state has money to do it. The policy that needs to be put in place is, as these communities grow in terms of population, there needs to be a way to generate a revenue that will support that growth. And again, what we're talking about is, you generate revenue from your populace through taxes. And people, again, you could think about it as tax is a bad word, or you could think about it as paying your way for the things that you want. And to me, there's a policy change that needs to be made within our fiscal system, that as more and more people come to a community, that community can pay for its own growth, or at least a bigger portion of it. We recently changed the rules in Business Ready Communities program to say that a community would have to come up with at least 25% of the project that they want to do. And it was met with resistance, not because our communities are greedy, but because they're just not in a position to pay for things. And frankly, we wanted to demonstrate that that's a big hurdle for our communities to overcome. We don't blame our communities, we blame the system in which they live, which is they have a system of very little revenue for the things that are required of them. And we think that that's broken. And so I think it's going to require some policy and some investment in order to change that infrastructure of growth.
Yeah, I can see that being a pretty hard sell, but really, I agree. I mean, how do you get there? I'm looking at the Q&A here, and Jenny, if you see some questions, please pop in too, because we have a pretty robust Q&A thread going here. I've seen you present to lawmakers. I hope they're listening. I think there's a pretty strong tide of opinion about taxation, and the fact that it's seems to be that your own hard-earned money is going away from you rather than pooling with others and then coming back to you to pay for things you could not afford on your own, as Brenda Henson has said many times.
Yeah.
So let's see here. There's the political wins. What does it take to change the conversation in Wyoming to one of plenty instead of scarcity? How have other states been able to make these kinds of fundamental shifts? Do you have a psychology degree?
Oh, I do not. I have an engineering degree, which means I really understand humans. Here's what's interesting, and I look back, that culture and change management problem is real. That is the problem. And what we're hoping to do is help people understand that the problem is more solvable than they think it is. Because in our head, we have built this construct that says all taxes are bad. In fact, we're the 47th least taxed state in the nation. And we have gone to a spot where we're trying to get to the 50th. We're trying to be the lowest, regardless of whether it works or not, for the problem. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, let's look at the actual data. And so I hope that lawmakers will take the data that we had from Wyoming voters, and they'll look at it and say, okay, wait a second, 35% of the people actually favor taxes for growth. So maybe it's not as bad as we thought. In fact, if you start to do some math, right, you got 35%, and then what did we have, like, so that would be like 65% maybe. So let's say if you add 15% to the 35% and you take out this, we're talking about a 15% swing. And so then it becomes really close. And again, what we're asking people to do is, one, dig into the problem a little deeper than their knee-jerk reaction. Because my knee-jerk reaction is usually that type of way too, where it's like surface level information. But once you dig into the problem, you realize that there are ways to solve it. And then the other thing that we would like to do is to help the leaders in our communities and in our state to realize that your job as leaders is not necessarily to only be popular in the moment, that you're going to have to make those hard calls. And when we look at it, we look at the state as a republic, and we've got to protect the Constitution. We've got to understand our populace and what their needs are, but we also have to look at the future. And so if we're looking into the future, we have a responsibility to the people who are here now and the people who are going to be here in the future to make sure that we're making investments that make sense and we're creating policy that will make that future better than it is today. And I think that that's the thing that's hard today, because we're so in the moment that we think we're a pure democracy where we just amplify the voices, but we're really a republic, and we want a communication and we want a dialogue with the public to represent what's real. but then also look at the future and protect our Constitution. And I think if we do those things, then we probably come up with different answers than we have in just those knee-jerk reactions.
It's you're talking about the difference between leading and representing. And that's always a tricky balance for any elected, but we look at them as leaders, but we want them to represent us. And so there's this, I think we have to lead ourselves as well. We have to step up and be grown-ups and try to take our medicine. And I mean, I've said for years now that, and I'll put a link in the chat to Tax Reform 2000, which talked about our tiny tax base and how the more people come in, the more money we lose because we all use more resources than we contribute to, and it's not sustainable. So I'll put that link in the chat. Jenny, have you got some Q&A for us?
Yeah, well, just a little bit along this line, someone asked if you could speak to the notion that we might have to let an entire generation move out of leadership before we can move forward. Of thoughts on that?
You know, that I'm not sure I'm not sure about that, because here's the thing. When people, especially when people step up to become the head of an agency, or they take a position in their community at a local level, or they rally people around to lead, or if they get elected into the legislature or the executive branches, I feel like they're saying that they want to be leaders. And I don't think we need to say, let's wait. I think there's an education process. I think there's a dialogue that needs to happen. And I don't think it's going to happen over one conversation. I think it's going to take a lot to do that. But it comes with like that ratio of, I hope, that ratio of listening more than we talk. I think that's a big thing. And realizing that the first response to something or a small set of information is not necessarily the truth. And I think if we can encourage that type of thing, I think it's important. The other thing I would say, and this is, it's easy for me to talk about leadership and say these things and not have to put a yard sign out for my position. But I will say that we've had to take hard stands at the Business Council over projects. We've had to make hard calls about our rules and upset some folks from time to time. And what we've found is that it's not as bad as we think. That while people might be upset in the moment, a lot of times they come around and go, yeah, it was probably the right thing, but gosh, it's hard for us. And the other part is that I think this combination of legislative and executive branches and the dialogue between them, of having folks like me do the polling that says this is reality, utilize it as a legislator or someone who's looking to get elected, utilize this information and understanding of the problem to better represent the problem to your constituents. That's a relationship that needs to be, I think, enhanced.
And another question that came up is along this lines of Wyoming being one of plenty instead of scarcity. Are there other states that have made a similar kind of shift that people could look to?
Boy, well, first of all, I totally agree with the shift between, from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance. I think if we can look at how, as we grow, we actually improve rather than as we grow, we lose something. I think that's important. I don't have off the top of my head, or we haven't necessarily looked at what other states do or have done to make that shift. One of the things that we have been really, really focused on is this, like a really deep view of the Wyoming problem. But I think that that's a really good angle for us to look at is what's going on out in other places and how have they made that shift. Always knowing that we're working in a place that's a little different and we're special and we should treat ourselves that way and look at our problem specifically.
And so here's another one that you on how do you see that the rural health transformation grant funding could play into the big changes that are needed in Wyoming.
Wow, that's a good one. I will say, we've been promoting that out, and hopefully getting people to be involved, but I don't know the ins and outs of that. I would say that Director Johansson, though, at the Department of Health knows a ton of that, and I know that Curtis Biggs in the governor's office has been really diving deep into that. So, but what I can tell you is that rural health and health in general is an important component of livability in our state, and making sure that people have, that they can live a healthy life. That's super important to our communities, but I don't have the details on that particular program.
I think what we're saying is that our policymakers need to make policy. They need to look at, they were able to cut property tax very effectively. They need to look and see how to grow the tax base and spread it around fairly so that we all pay, as you said, our fair share. And for instance, the property tax givebacks that have been happening all across the state accumulate the most in Teton County because they contribute the most property tax to our state. And so there are very wealthy people getting incredible tax breaks that, that are not going into either the local scene or the state. So yeah, you kind of wonder.
Sue, on that point, I think this is a really good example that I think we should look at. And I think you said early on that there's been this sort of like, well, this is the way it is, and this is the way it should always be. And we have taken, and I put the cycle of the economic growth flywheel in there for a reason. It looks a lot like the scientific method for anybody who's a science geek like me and wants to get into that. But here's the thing: is like there's a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that if we reduce property taxes and we reduce that burden, that then people may spur on economic growth and maybe start businesses and so on. That's a hypothesis. It maybe it was worth testing out. So instead of saying that now that is locked and forever in policy and statute and forever it will be, I think we need to take a little different look at it and say, okay, that is an experiment. And did that experiment result, or will that experiment result in the outcomes that we wanted? And if it didn't, we should stop that experiment. And I think that's a different approach to policymaking. It's a different approach to running an agency, but it's something that we've been working with and trying to understand, because we don't always make the right call, but we run experiments, and you always get data from experiments, and you have to let that data lead you to the next problem. And I think instead we say, oh, it's in statute, it's forever now, and we can never touch it. And I just don't believe that's the case.
Thank you. Jenny, I think we've about run out of time. We have mere seconds.
Yeah, we have. And there's lots of questions and also dialogue in the question answer. And so we will pass that on to Josh, and then maybe in future avenues, those could be answered. But thank you to our audience for your robust interest in this topic, and for spending your lunch hours over the last 2 years leaning into these queries and conversations about Wyoming's tax policy with Wyoming Tax Facts and Equality State Policy Center. And again, we are extremely grateful for our dedicated sponsor, the Wyoming Community Foundation. And for now, this concludes our partnership series, which has been an honor for all of us to be working on to bring you all this material. Please do take a few minutes after this webinar concludes to fill out a survey that will pop up. We really do value your feedback. Audience, please. Thank you. Please and thank you. We will be sharing the links of this recording, Josh's slide deck via both Wyoming Tax Facts and Equality State Policy Center. Please follow both of us or all three of our organizations on social media. We love to have more followers, and that is a great way to stay in touch with us, as well as WyomingTaxFacts.org and equalitystate.org. You can continue to find more updates and further information. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Josh, so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and what a great conversation.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.